All right, James, we are now live.
Thank you, Kyle. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Rhodes. I hope everyone's doing well tonight. This is the first meeting of our Board of Adjustment for Pitt County in quite a while. We did have a variance request that we dealt with back in July of 2019. So this is our first meeting since that time. We've got several new members, so we'll be going through not only some changes with the membership tonight, and I'll review some of those in just a few minutes, but tonight also is the time that we should elect officers. So with that, what I'd like is, since neither our chair or vice chair is no longer on the board, I'm going to ask one of our senior members, David Davenport, if he'll at least take us through, call on the roll call, get us set up as far as prayer and pledge, and take us down toward the administrative items. And Jordan, our assistant county attorney, will take over for the election of officers. So let's get started. We'll go through introductions after we go through some of these preliminaries. So Mr. Davenport, if you don't mind getting the meeting started, call to order.
Yes, sir. I'd be glad to. Tabitha, can you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. David Davenport.
Here.
Rex Fleming.
Here.
Tucker Moore. Tucker Moore.
Here.
Joseph Pierce.
Here.
Johnny Penner.
Here.
And I don't believe Michael Bridgers or Reader Johnson Gilbert has joined us yet. Those are the two alternates.
All right, Tabitha, thank you. First, we'd just like to open with just a couple of moments of silence if you want to do a silent prayer at this point. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Next, if you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
and to the
republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, justice for all.
Thank you very much. Next, I'll ask for an approval of the minutes of the July 23rd, 2019 meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
Okay. Motion made by Mr. Pierce. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Who was that?
Fleming.
Fleming has seconded. Motion's been made to approve and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, I'm sorry. Can we have Tab do a roll call vote? We have to do that in this remote meeting forum.
I understand. Thank you. Roll call vote, please, Tabitha. Thank you.
David Davenport.
Approve.
Rex Fleming.
Approve.
Tucker Moore.
Approve.
Joseph Pierce.
Approve.
And Johnny Penner.
Approve.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next on the agenda, we'll go to Mr. Rhodes for reappointments and appointments for the board.
Thank you, Mr. Davenport. Again, I really appreciate everyone coming online tonight. I know this is the preferred way that you'd like to meet. And of course, for your actions, and Eric Gooby on staff with us here at the planning office will go through a lot of the details about how this board acts and why it is necessary to meet in person for a lot of your actions. But again, we really appreciate your willingness to volunteer and serve for the county. This is a very important board. A lot of the items that you deal with are borderline court cases, so they're treated as such, and there are particular processes. That's why we've got our assistant county attorney online. He helps us keep straight from the legal matters, and he also helps us ensure that we're paying close attention to all our rules and regulations. So to the item at hand, we've got a new complement of board members. Mr. Davenport, Mr. Fleming have been with us for the longest duration. We're pleased to have Mr. Johnny Penner, who served previously with our planning board. He is now a member. We also have Tucker Moore, who's currently serving on our planning board now, who's also doing dual service with the Board of Adjustment. Tucker, we really appreciate that. And then Mr. Joseph Pierce, again, he's one of our new members too. He is online tonight. And so I just open it up just while we're doing introductions and see if anyone would like to just add a few words about what they do or how they look forward to serving in this capacity, since we're not face to face and we really can't do that. So Mr. Davenport, if you'd like to kind of go through the board membership. And again, we've got a full board tonight. Everyone online that's a voting member, that's impressive. So Mr. Davenport.
Okay, well, I'll start. I'm David Davenport. I farm in the Pactolus community. Been on the Board of Adjustments board for, I guess, three or 4 years, I think maybe. And I'm also on the planning board as well. So I enjoy, I wanted to do something to be active in community affairs. And this has been a good outlet for that. So Mr. Penner, tell me about yourself.
Okay, Johnny Penner here, live in the Belleville community. Educator was my career, 34 years as a middle school, high school principal. I have really enjoyed serving on the planning board 2 terms and looking forward to serving again here on the Board of Adjustments. A little bit different procedurally, and so I'm kind of looking forward to it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Penner. Mr. Fleming.
Yes, sir. I'm Rex Fleming. I've been serving on this board, I guess, about 3 or 4 years as well. I look forward to serving. Not only do I serve on this board, I serve on the Pitt County Health Department board as well as some more organizations within the county. I live in the Belleville area too, and I'm looking forward to working with all of us and take care of the task that's at hand.
Thank you, Rex. Appreciate that. Mr. Joseph Pierce.
Hello, I'm Joe Pierce, live in the Winterville area. Brand new to the Board of Adjustment. My career has been long time in the military and retired here in the Winterville area. Used to teach at ECU, running the ROTC department. So some of you guys have seen me in and around there. But I cut my teeth on strategic planning, and I enjoy participating in the community and being involved in what goes on here and helping make these important decisions for our community.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Tucker Moore.
Hi, everybody. My name's Tucker Moore. I live in Winterville. I'm also on the Winterville Planning Board, and I work at North Carolina Driving School in Winterville. Good to see everybody.
Thank you, Tucker. Miss Rita Jackson Gilbert.
I don't think she's online tonight.
Yes, she's here.
She is? Okay, I missed her. She's not on my screen. Sorry about that, Miss Jackson Gilbert.
That's all right. Good evening, everyone. I am Rita Jackson Gilbert. I'm a seasoned educator, still active with 37 years of service. I've been at W.H. Robinson in Winterville for 28 years, but I live in the Belleville community and very concerned about that. I wanted to get active to try to help this side of north of the river balance. And so I'm looking forward to working with everybody.
Great. Thank you very much. Welcome. Michael Bridgers.
Hi, Mike Bridges. retired educator from Pitt Community College, live out near Falkland, and looking forward to serving on the board and making a contribution. Want to be able to give back for so many years others have given to me. So I want to take some of this time and reinvest it back into the community.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Bridgers. I believe that's all, James. I don't know if there's anyone else on.
That is it. What I will mention, we do have Tab Alton with us, and she is not only our administrative assistant for the planning office, but she is also here to administer the oaths of office for those new members. So we're going to take them one at a time, Mr. Davenport, if you don't mind, and she'll administer those oaths, and then everyone will be formal members of the Board of Adjustment. Tab, you're muted right now.
Sorry. Joseph Pierce, we'll start with you, please, sir.
Okay.
I'll say the oath and I'll just get you to repeat it after me.
All right.
I state your name.
I, Joseph Pierce,
Solemnly affirm that I will support and maintain.
say that one more time.
Solemnly affirm that I will support and maintain
Solemnly affirm that I will support and maintain
the Constitution and laws of the United States
the Constitution and laws of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of my office as a Board of Adjustment member.
the duties of my office as a Board of Adjustment member.
Okay. All right. Michael Bridgers.
Yes.
Okay. I state your name.
I, Michael Bridgers,
Do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support and maintain
that I will support and maintain
the Constitution and laws of the United States
the Constitution and laws of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of my office
the duties of my office
as a member of the Board of Adjustment.
as a member of the Board of Adjustment.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Miss Rita Jackson Gilbert. Okay. I state your name.
I, Rita Jackson Gilbert,
Do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support and maintain
that I will support and maintain
the Constitution and laws of the United States
Constitution and laws of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of my office
the duties of my office
as a member of the Board of Adjustment.
as a member of the Board of Adjustment.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Okay, that's everyone.
Has Johnny been sworn in?
He doesn't have to be sworn back in because he was already a member, is my understanding. Is that correct, Jordan?
I'm not sure. Has he been a member of this board?
Yes. He was an alternate member.
Did his membership lapse at any time?
No.
Okay.
But I don't know that we ever swore him in as an alternate.
We did.
We did?
Yes.
Okay. We're straight then. Okay, Mr. Davenport, we're going to turn it over to our Assistant County Attorney. And as I mentioned earlier, again, thank you for everyone sharing kind of your insight, and welcome to the Board of Adjustment formally now. So we're going to move forward then with the election of officers. And as typically happens at the planning board level and Board of Adjustment, our county attorney or assistant county attorney steps in. So Jordan Smith is going to take care of that business and make sure that we handle items appropriately. So Jordan.
Thank you, James. Here tonight to assist you in the election of officers, and we need to elect a chair and a vice chair. And I'll just quickly kind of lay out the ground rules for the nomination and election process. So we need to elect those two positions. We'll start with chair and then go to vice chair. Any member can nominate any other member. Any regular member can nominate any other regular member. For the purposes of this, we need to exclude the alternate members. Any member can nominate him or herself. Nominations do not require a second. If there are multiple nominations, we'll vote on them in reverse order, meaning the last nomination will go first. Your rules require a majority vote to elect these positions. So a 5-member board, 3 votes are required to win an election. Are there any questions about this process?
No.
No.
Okay, here none. Open the floor for nominations for the position of chair.
I nominate David Davenport for chair.
Second that and move that the nominations be closed.
Can we, just because of the weird Zoom world and voting, can we let's hold off, if we could, just hold off on that motion and see if there's any other nominations, and then we'll just vote if that'd be acceptable to the board.
Yes.
Any other nominations for position of chair?
I nominate Rex Fleming.
Any other nominations? Okay, so there's been 2 nominations, Rex Fleming and David Davenport. We'll vote on these in reverse order with Mr. Fleming going first. And because of Zoom requirements, we have to have a roll call vote. So this first vote, and if the first person to get 3 votes will be the winner. So Tab, can you do a roll call vote with Mr. Fleming as the candidate? And any yeas will be yes and nays will be no. And if Mr. Fleming does not carry 3 votes, then we'll go to Mr. Davenport.
David Davenport,
Nay.
Rex Fleming,
Yes.
Tucker Moore,
Yes.
Joseph Pierce,
Yes.
and Johnny Penner.
Nay.
So with 3 votes, Mr. Fleming has won a majority and will be chair. Congratulations to Mr. Fleming. If I may, I'll continue now to position of vice chair. Same rules apply to this office. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
I'd like to nominate David Davenport.
Any other nominations? Hearing none, Tab, can you do a roll call vote for Mr. Davenport to serve as vice chair, please?
Sir, David Davenport,
Yes.
Rex Fleming,
Yes.
Tucker Moore,
Yes.
Joseph Pierce,
Yes.
and Johnny Penner. Johnny
Yes.
Penner. Thank you.
Congratulations,
Yes.
Davenport. And with that, turn the floor over to newly elected chair, Mr. Fleming, to continue through the agenda tonight.
Thank you. Oh, man. Okay. The first thing on our agenda for tonight is, let me find my paper. Did I get that?
Mr. Chair, I can help you out a little bit. I'm up next. I'm going to just briefly go over, this is James. I'll briefly go over the rules of procedure. And everyone, if you've got your agenda package, it actually begins on page 21. That is our duly adopted and approved rules of procedure for the Board of Adjustment. And a lot of the information that's included in this document, Eric has got as part of your training that we'll go through in a little while, but just to give you a little overview to start with. First up, this board deals with particular types of actions, and Eric's training is going to go through those, but variances, special use permits, appeals, these are very specific type of actions that are requested by people that might feel like the rules need to be adjusted or some changes need to be considered by the Board of Adjustment. So your decisions play a very heavy role in some of these land use decisions that may come before you. I mentioned a little bit earlier, our last case dealt with a variance request. There was a home that was under construction and about halfway completed through the construction process, and it was found out by a surveyor that the home had been built in the wrong location and didn't meet some of the county requirements. Those are some of the hard and fast decisions that this board is put in the middle of. So it's very important that you recognize the processes that we'll go through and the types of consideration and criteria that need to be part of those decisions. And Eric's really put together a good training session to get you started on that. As far as our rules of procedure, again, some of the actions that you'll take will be a simple majority. Others, because of the changes that may be necessary, especially for a variance request, that requires a 4/5 vote. And Eric will take you through some of those a little bit later. The one big thing that's in here that you just need to mark on your calendars, our regular standing monthly meeting is the 4th Tuesday night at 5:30, exactly like we're meeting tonight. So we won't always meet. This type of board, certainly in my opinion, and we've been at this for quite a while now, if we're meeting every month or so for a variance request, there's something wrong with our ordinance and we might need to look at changing that. So, but periodically you're going to have some of these cases come before you. Just know, I would say we'll probably meet 2 to 3 times a year in most cases. And with some of the changes that we'll talk about with 160D, that's a whole nother discussion. Our planning legislation at the state level has changed, and we're also looking at changing some of our local regulations. That might bring a little bit more work your way. So just remember, mark your calendars for our meetings monthly, and we'll let you know as soon as possible whether or not we'll actually hold that meeting or not. So most of you that have been appointed, the good news is with this new complement of board members, we should have you on our board for a while. So you'll get to work together for a while. Some of you will be eligible for reappointment. So you know that you can actually serve 2 full 3-year terms if you'd like. And we really encourage, by the time you go through this training and you get your feet under you well, we want to keep you on the board so you can use some of that experience and training. So, Mr. Chairman, that's really the Board of Adjustments rules of procedure in a nutshell. Some of the things that will be specifically talked about in Eric's presentation a little bit later are in our rules of procedure too, and will make a lot more sense as he goes through that with ex parte communication and some of that information. So Mr. Chairman, one thing that we did skip over and Tab has just reminded me, we've got 2 alternate members, Ms. Rita Jackson Gilbert and Mr. Michael Bridgers. Remember, it's important that when we get to a voting condition, if we are missing one of our regular voting members, we need to know who's the first alternate and who's the second alternate, so we know exactly who's in line to vote. So I'll put that out before you, Mr. Chair, so you and your voting board members, maybe with some input from your 2 alternates, who should be alternate 1, who will serve as alternate 2. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. The next thing on our agenda is the planning matters, which is page 31.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, maybe going back is something that I actually skipped as part of the election of officers and getting the board organized. We need to look at the alternate members. So we've got Ms. Rita Jackson Gilbert and Mr. Michael Bridgers. The board, Mr. Chairman, needs to decide who is alternate number 1 and who is alternate number 2. So if you don't mind taking care of that business item, we'll move straight on to that next item after that.
And with that being said, who shall we have as our first alternate and our second alternate? Right now, the floor is open for either nomination.
I would say one may be willing to do it or want to do it be first. You may want to just ask them, would someone be interested in being the first alternate?
I can do it.
Okay.
This is Rita. I can do it.
Miss Rita Jackson
Gilbert.
Okay, she requested to be the first alternate. With that being said, Mr. Joseph will be our second. At this time, we'll ask for a vote. All in favor?
Wait a minute, Mr. Chairman. Actually, Mr. Michael Bridgers would be the second alternate.
Okay.
If that's the case.
All right. We have for our first alternate, Miss Rita. She will be the first. And our second one will be Mr. Bridges.
Correct.
All right. At this time, we will have a vote on this matter. All in favor, let it be known. Where we're gonna ask our secretary to ask for the vote.
David Davenport,
Yes.
Rex Fleming,
Yes.
Tucker Moore,
Yes.
Joseph Pierce,
Yes.
Johnny Penner,
Yes.
and Jordan. Do the alternates vote on this?
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Jackson and Mr. Bridges, for your willingness to help serve to make this board. All right. The next item on the agenda is found on page 31. Okay. Do we need to go through these items?
Mr. Chairman, Eric Gooby, truly serves as our zoning administrator. And he's a senior planner here with our office. He's going to briefly go through these proposed changes that I alluded to with our planning legislation. And then I'll come back on and talk a little bit more about the history of your Board of Adjustment before Eric does the training session. So Eric's ready to make a presentation. There'll be a brief presentation about these ordinance amendments.
Okay. Mr. Eric, return it into your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I start on this, there was a comment in the chat box from Mr. Moore about asking to be excused at 7 for another engagement where he has to go coach a team. Is that something that the board would like to, Mr. Chair, if you'd like to, okay, if he can be excused for that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let me go ahead and start and share this. Okay, can everybody see my screen? I'm briefly just going to go through what Chapter 160D is. For those of you who are on the planning board, you got the full 7-course version of this last week at the planning board meeting, so I won't be going through it in that much detail, but just to kind of make sure everybody's up to date with what this is. But the county is proposing several amendments to most of our development-related ordinances, particularly zoning, subdivision, manufactured home park. Also, that includes addressing, flood damage prevention, and also sexual-oriented businesses, which is an ordinance that those types of uses come to this board for approval. We're also proposing several other amendments that are not related to 160D, and those are mainly for clarification and consistency purposes, or to address items that have kind of come up over the last few years of enforcement of the ordinance. Just some background, Chapter 160D, it's a complete reorganization and modernization of the state's planning and development regulations. And it's the first such reorganization since 1905. And it repeals the previous enabling statutes for both counties and cities. And so it puts all of our statutes under one single chapter. So now where cities operated under one set of statutes, counties operated under another, now we're all under the same rules and the same guidelines. And that's all under Chapter 160D. And the law allows local governments until July 1st of this year to amend any ordinances that are affected by that law. So that's the process we're going through now. We've been going through changing the language, taking things out, revising language, bringing it up to date, and making sure that all is in compliance with that new law. And copies of these ordinances are available for review on our county website. That's the address there. It's pittcountync.gov/160D. And so it's got the ordinances they're in draft format, as well as some summaries. The summaries that you have in your packet tonight, those are included on there as well. So in terms of the 160D changes, one of the major changes, particularly the zoning ordinance, is we have to remove conditional use permit language. The ordinance currently has conditional uses and special uses. And really the only difference between the two of them is which board hears those requests. The conditional uses are heard by the commissioners. Special uses are heard by the Board of Adjustment. The general statutes are now, with 160D, now have removed anything related to conditional uses. They're all considered special uses. So we're doing a lot of work to take out the conditional use language. I'll kind of, in just a minute, when we get into the training session, and also some of this, we'll talk a little bit more about what that means for this board as well as for the commissioners. But just know that that's probably the biggest change that we've got with this new legislation. It broadens the conflict of interest standards, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit in the training session. Clarifies quasi-judicial procedures and evidentiary hearing requirements, which are, again, very important for this board, as well as the Board of Adjustment requirements. Also revises a lot of the vested rights legislation, and also enacts what they call permit choice, where you get to, if you have submitted a request or submitted an application for an approval, if the regulation changes sometime between that submittal and your approval, you get to choose which regulation you want to apply, or which version of that regulation you want to apply. There's also some changes to the zoning amendment requirements and consistency statements. And then overall, we have to be consistent with our terminology and our definitions to meet the state statutes. Same thing with that special use language. We have to make sure that our regulations are also consistent and identical to what the state allows us. There's a new use that we're putting in. It's now specifically allowed under 160D, which is a temporary healthcare structure. And also throughout the ordinance, we're going to be updating those statutory references. So just to get back to talking about those conditional use permits and changing those over to special uses. Last year, we had attempted to change all the conditional use permits over to special use permits anyways. But the Board of Commissioners indicated they wanted to retain some authority over some of these uses. And so what we're proposing is essentially we're going to have two classes of special use permit. We'll have a class 1 that'll go to the Board of County Commissioners, and a class 2 which goes to the Board of Adjustment. And again, really the main difference is that the ones that go to the Board of Commissioners are ones that either involve some type of public expenditure of funds or may have some sort of negative impact on surrounding properties. Things like sand mines, solar farms, landfills, those sorts of things. So those are the ones that will continue to go to the county commissioners. And then the special use permits that the board currently hears, we're going to consider those class 2. And now, one of the things that we are looking at amending, and if the Board of Commissioners approves it, is that we would like to send all our daycares, all our daycare uses, daycare centers, and residential daycare, we would like to make those class 2 special use permits to bring to the Board of Adjustment. So it works kind of twofold. It gets it off the commissioner's plate because they're not generally anything too controversial, but it also gives y'all some work because we do get a handful of daycare centers and daycare facilities throughout the year. But in other terms, the other special uses that come to this board, as I mentioned, things like sexual oriented businesses, shooting ranges, those have their own ordinances that are also enforced, and also they have to not only meet the requirements of our zoning ordinance, but also those ordinances, and so those get reviewed by this board as well. The other amendments that we're proposing that aren't related to 160D, we've got some amendments to the table of permitted uses, as well as section 8, which is our development standards section. And that's where when we have individual uses and they have specific requirements, say additional setbacks or additional screening requirements. Those two sections, that table and that section 8, they kind of talk to each other. They reference back and forth to each other. And so we're going through making sure that those are consistent. There were some issues where things weren't shown in the table that were shown in section 8 and vice versa. So I've gone through both those and made sure that those are right and correct. We're also amending section 10, looking to sort of beef up our landscaping requirements for commercial uses. Also reducing the time limit to establish a conditional zoning district. The conditional zoning district is where you rezone a piece of property for a specific use. And currently the ordinance allows up to 2 years to establish that use. And what we found in trying to enforce these districts and trying to make sure that they stay on track to get established, that 2-year time frame is just excessive. So we're looking to reduce that to 6 months. Looking to remove the certificate of zoning compliance. That's not something that we currently do. The way it's worded in the ordinance, it's almost like a certificate of occupancy for a home or new use. And we do annual inspections on most of these uses, like conditional uses and special uses that have been approved. So we don't need the certificate. We're constantly going back out on a routine basis to try to ensure that they are staying in continued compliance. And then also updating and amending the executive summary and commentary in the ordinance just to kind of explain what some of these regulations are for and what the authority for them is. Then updating our appendices and application charts and flow charts. Then also making sure that all our language is gender neutral. We have some references to chairman, vice chairman, and we'll just change those to chair and vice chair and so on. And then just any other formatting or typos or numbering errors we found, we've gone in and fixed those to make sure that the ordinance is in good shape. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody might have about 160D. Okay.
All right, are there any questions? If not, we'll proceed on to our training.
Mr. Chairman, I'm up next. I'm just going to give you a brief overview, give you a history of pretty much how this board came to be. And let me just get some things working here. Hopefully you can see my screen now. And again, we appreciate your work in all this, and we just want to make sure that you've got a good understanding. It's a lot of information to go over in one night. We realize that. So Eric and I, and we've also have Ben Rogers here on staff with us. He's online tonight. Ben works in zoning administration, and certainly Jordan, if you have any questions from a legal perspective, Jordan, our assistant county attorney, is part of our staff to the Board of Adjustment for the county. So please reach out to us. We know there's a lot of information out there for you tonight. So just wanted to give you an idea of how zoning came to be in Pitt County and how this board came about. Originally, only a portion, back in 2001, only a portion of the county about 20 years ago was zoned. And this was this area. We heard at least a couple of folks are from around the Belvoir area. So we had the Northwest Planning Area, which was generally the area kind of almost pie-shaped north of the river, took in Old River Road, NC 33, the Belvoir community, and on up to the Edgecombe County line. And there was a lot of reasons why we saw that was necessary. There'd been a lot of mobile home park growth in that area that had some effects on the school systems. At that point in time, some of the schools north of the river were actually overcrowded. And there was a capacity issue. So some of the Board of Education members, as well as some of our Board of Commissioners, felt like this area was the first area in the county that needed to be zoned just to look at certain types of development. There was also a proposed cotton gin. There were a lot of different things going on in that area of the county at the time. And in turn, the flood. That area of the county had been devastated by Hurricane Floyd back in '99. So all things put together, that was the first area to be zoned. And in turn, there needed to be a Board of Adjustment. So that your Board of Adjustment first grew out of the Northwest Planning Area, and the people that were represented on the Board of Adjustment were exclusively, they resided in that area, and rightfully so. So once countywide zoning came into play in 2003, your board membership broadened. It included folks from all around the county, just like is represented here tonight. It's now structured that we have 2 voting members from north of the river, 3 voting members from south of the river. That's our voting members. In the alternate members, we did not differentiate there. And just so you know, you alternate members, you serve a vital role, because if someone's absent, Ms. Rita, you'll be the first one in to become the voting member. If we actually have 2 absences, both of you would vote. So that's all to say, we like having people in the alternate roles. You heard that Mr. Penner had served in that capacity previously. He's now been moved up into a full voting member role. So our countywide zoning, as shown on the map, we've got several different zoning districts. Some of them are not easily seen on this scale of map, but the vast majority is the dark green. That is rural agricultural, not surprising in the very rural areas of the county. That's what it's zoned as. The lighter green is rural residential, kind of in closer to Greenville and Winterville and Ayden. And then we've got some other areas also. So the vast majority of our zoning area is zoned for residential or agricultural purposes. And there are some others. We've had some requests for commercial zoning. You can see some of the red areas here. on the map, those are actually commercial in nature. And we do have a few industrial districts specifically for EJE recycling that's down at the eastern end of the county. So other things as far as the planning, you know, with our zoning, everything is predicated on our land use plan. So you probably have noticed there's a similar pattern between our zoning map and our land use plan map, and that's by design. We now, state statutes require that we have a consistency statement for any rezoning cases when they're considered by our planning board or our commissioners. So it is very important. We planners take that job seriously. Our legal staff make sure that we're following the letter of the law. We want to make sure that we're staying in compliance with our duly adopted land use plan. Our first land use plan was developed back in 1990. We had a major update in 2002, and then a second major update in 2011. I will let you know, as part of our work program that's included in your agenda tonight, one of our big upcoming projects for the next fiscal year is an update to our land use plan. It's going on 10 years old now. It's time to do some update, and this is also somewhat led along by the new general statutes that have been recently adopted, where it now requires that communities that enforce zoning have a current land use plan. Makes good sense. Also, we've had some smaller areas that we've done specific or more detailed land use planning in. The Southwest Bypass, that was a major new roadway that was installed here. We had a collaborative effort between the county, the city of Greenville, Winterville, and Ayden to look at that corridor. And of course, that's going on the western side of Greenville, Ayden, and Winterville. That was adopted back in 2018. We are right now in the throes of the NC 43 South Corridor Land Use Plan. And again, that's a collaborative effort between us and the city of Greenville and the Urban Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is a transportation organization. And with that, we're hoping to get that plan adopted in the very near future. We're going back to the board about that next Monday, and hopefully that can be also included within our comprehensive land use plan. So those are two areas that we knew were seeing rapid growth, that had new improvements, that needed some special attention. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Eric, and he's going to go through some of the duties and responsibilities and start going into all the training requirements that's part of your package for tonight. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Eric, Mr. Chair, and let him take you right into the training session. And this training session should be about 30 minutes, just to let you know. And it gives you some hands-on experience on some cases that might hold. There might be some truth in some of these cases that we've been involved with through the years in our experience here with the county. We might have changed some of the names to protect the innocent or guilty. And but we're going to take you through that process tonight, and Eric's going to be the person to do that. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm turning it over to Eric.
All right.
Thank you, James. Screen shared again here. All right, everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
So with the Board of Adjustment, we'll kind of talk about this a little bit more as we get into the session, but your main duties and responsibilities, you have pretty much three main duties. Appeals from any order, decision, requirement, or interpretation made by the zoning administrator, special use permits, and variances. And also on certain occasions, you may have to do what they call a special exception, and any other matter that the board is required to act upon by any other Pitt County ordinance. So for instance, you're not just the Board of Adjustment for the zoning ordinance, you're also the Board of Adjustment for the subdivision ordinance. And so any variance or any appeal to anything with that ordinance would also come before this board. Again, we talked about the special uses. There's a list. This is the list of the ones that you primarily will be dealing with. And like I said, as we proposed with the 160D updates, also have those daycares and also wedding venues. So with that, we'll move right on into our training session. There are several roles in planning when it comes to boards. Primarily the ones that, like the Board of County Commissioners, that's in a legislative body. And those are the ones that they adopt ordinances, make amendments, they approve budgets. The commissioners can also serve as a planning board. And they also have authority under the statutes to approve things like plats and special use permits. For those of you that have served also on the planning board, you're aware that that is an advisory board. You make recommendations, you sponsor planning studies, you basically advise the governing board on decisions. Again, the planning board, and what you find in a lot of smaller towns, is that the planning board also may serve a dual role as a board of adjustment. And, that can be good and bad. It can be good because a lot of times in those smaller towns, it's hard to get enough people to want to serve on a board that, when you have people that are willing to serve on a planning board, they can also just as easily do it as the board of adjustment. But the flip side of that is sometimes it's hard to switch hats and know which procedures you're supposed to be following. So we're lucky with the county, we have individual boards and we can kind of keep it a little more separated. With this board, it's a quasi-judicial. And again, you're going to be hearing appeals, variances, special use permits, and you're all following a very specific set of procedures in hearing those cases. And then the last role is an administrative, and that's what the staff level is. That's issuing permits, administering and enforcing the ordinance, and making recommendations to the boards. And just as an aside, if anybody's got any questions, this is going to be very informal tonight. If you want to just type your question in the chat box, or you can even interrupt me and just, if you say, hey, I didn't quite catch that, can you repeat it? Just let me know. I'll be glad to stop and go back over it. But in terms of our authority to regulate land uses, North Carolina is what's called a Dillon's Rule state, which means that there was a judge back in the 1800s that said that when you are under Dillon's Rule, you are a creature of the state, or the local government is a creature of the state. We only have those powers that are delegated to us by the state legislature. And that comes through usually enabling legislation, which again is 160D. That's our new legislative or enabling legislation. That sets the limits and the procedures we have to follow. We also have police powers, which is just a broad authority to protect health, safety, and public welfare. A lot of that comes into like the building code or some sort of code enforcement regulations. And then when you have legislation that isn't specifically granted, a county or a town can apply for a local bill or submit a local bill through their representative. And those bills, as an analogy to the Board of Adjustment, that's almost like a variance from the general statutes. It allows you to enforce certain rules that would not normally be allowed under that law. So you also have vested rights. As I mentioned, the new chapter 160D really did a lot of revisions to vested rights. For those of you who don't know, a vested right is the legal right to continue use even when the regulations have changed. So if you have an established vested right, whether it's through common law rights, valid building permit, or what we call a site-specific vesting plan, you have the right to finish that development. Even if the regulations changed, you are still vested under that original plan or that original right, and you can complete it as it was originally proposed. Non-conforming situations, those are somewhat similar. A non-conforming use is when you have a use that's either a land use the property or a structure. It was legal at the time that it was constructed, but for some reason, after the regulations have changed, it no longer conforms to those regulations. And there are strict limits to how a nonconformity can be continued. It may not be expanded or enlarged. It may not be changed to another use, and it may not be reestablished if it's abandoned or discontinued. And that's usually over a period of about 6 months. So once you stop a certain use, if it's a nonconformity, your clock starts ticking, and after 6 months, if it hasn't been reestablished, then it's no longer a non-conforming situation. It loses that status, and any new use or any, if you want to restart that use, you've got to bring it up to the current regulations. So just for an example, this is the structure that has a setback nonconformity. The structure was built before the countywide zoning ordinance was adopted, which established a 40-foot minimum building setback. So this property is well within that. So there are limits. We're obviously not going to make them tear down the building. We're not going to make them move it. It's allowed to continue, but there would be restrictions on it if they wanted to expand the building. They would have to make sure that any kind of expansion or future growth would occur so that it meets the setbacks. It cannot increase that nonconformity. So you can't add any more into the setback. So they would have to plan for that expansion to go on the back or the side so that it's outside of the setbacks. This would be an example of a non-conforming use of land. This is almost to Beaufort County, out past Grimesland. It's an old auto repair and salvage yard. It was not, when zoning was adopted, we didn't zone salvage yards. So essentially, if there was an existing salvage yard in the county, it was considered a non-conforming use. And so that way, if they wanted to expand it, they would have to come back before us. They would have to get permission to expand to additional property. But in this case, this was one that it was confined pretty much to the property. They also had a setback nonconformity there, you see, with the building that crosses the property line. And what we found after a few years, they had actually expanded onto the neighboring property. And so that not only had it expanded the use, but it also had encroached on somebody else's property. So we took some enforcement action, and we were able to get them to bring that back to the original extent of that non-conforming situation. So that's just an example of how a use cannot just expand without coming before us. And talking about the makeup of the Board of Adjustment, the statutes say that the board has to consist of at least 5 members, and you're appointed to 3-year terms. So we have 5 regular members and 2 alternates. 1 or more boards or bodies may be designated as the Board of Adjustment or may have the duties of the Board of Adjustment. So they may not be called the Board of Adjustment, but they hear quasi-judicial cases like the Board of County Commissioners. As I mentioned, they hear conditional use permits that we're proposing to change to a different class of special use permit. When they are hearing those cases and acting in that capacity, they have to follow the same quasi-judicial procedures that the Board of Adjustment does. And again, that can be difficult sometimes because when you have a board like a commissioners, they're used to just being able to do and act how they want to act with these. And so we have to make sure that they are following the proper procedures, and that's where our legal staff really helps us out a lot and keeps them running straight. So, but in terms of quasi-judicial procedures and quasi-judicial rules, it's very much like being in a court of law. There's an evidentiary hearing, and that is required to establish facts. It's not to gather opinions about the request or to gauge the popularity of it. It's to establish what are the facts of the case, and anybody that speaks has to be under oath, and they're considered a witness, just like in court. Cross-examination has to be allowed from the other party. And in something it's a little bit different from a court of law, hearsay is admissible, but you can't make it the basis of your decision. So that cannot be the sole finding for your final act. Any testimony that's provided by witnesses have to be supported by relevant, competent, and material evidence. And we'll kind of talk about that here in a little bit. One of the changes that 160D made is that we as staff must now provide all the administrative materials to the board as well as to the other parties. That includes copies of the application, staff reports, any photos, anything that we have that that's administrative. We provide that to all parties, and it's entered into the record as evidence, essentially. And then, if there's any objections, if the applicant objects to anything we've included or anything that we didn't include, they can make those objections and they can be ruled on by the chair of the board at the hearing. There's no ex parte communication. And what that means is when you are discussing the particulars of a case with one or more parties to the case outside of the hearing. And so if you are at the grocery store and the applicant comes up to you, knows you're a board member, comes up and wants to talk to you about a case, that's not allowed. If they call you, that's not allowed. If you go on a site visit, if you're allowed to go on a site visit, that's permissible, and you have to disclose that at the hearing. But if one of the neighbors or somebody comes up and wants to talk to you about the case, you should not talk to them about it. That's ex parte communication. It's not permissible. The board has to provide written findings of fact. And what that is, you have to essentially, in writing, lay out the basis for your decision. Those findings of fact will, if it's reviewed at the Superior Court, the court can follow those findings and determine whether or not the evidence that you used to make your decision was appropriate or not. And again, the decisions, as I said, they are appealed to Superior Court. They are not appealed to the Board of County Commissioners. Commissioners really have no say over the decisions you make. So just remember that, as James mentioned, we have had cases that have been appealed. We've had cases that have been overturned, and we'll talk about some of the cases later on in some of our scenarios that had gone to court and did not necessarily go the way of the county or the municipality. One other additional change from 160D is that hearings may now be continued also with no additional notice if the date, time, and the place of the continued hearing is announced at the hearing you're currently holding. So in other words, if excuse me, if you are if a hearing is just dragging out, if a hearing is just dragging out for hours and there's still evidence being presented, that hearing can be continued. You just state at the hearing when the date, time, and place of the continuance will be, and we will not be required to provide any additional mailed or public notice for that. If a hearing is scheduled for a meeting and you can't get a quorum, that hearing may then be continued to the next regular meeting, also without additional public notice. As James mentioned about the voting requirements, when you are considering a variance, a 4/5 vote of the board or supermajority is required to grant a variance. Again, that is to grant a variance. If a motion is made to deny a variance, that can be done with a simple majority. So approval of any of the standards for the variance, those all require a 4/5 vote. Any other matter that the board is hearing, whether it's a special use permit or appeals, that also requires just a simple majority. And if there's any vacancies on the board, or if any members have been disqualified for some type of conflict of interest or just can't vote, those members are not considered members of the board for that 4/5, for calculating that majority, provided that there are no alternates available. So if Ms. Jackson Gilbert or Mr. Bridges, if they're not available and we have a disqualification due to a conflict of interest, the voting membership would be 4 people as opposed to 5. So what are some of those things that would disqualify you from voting? The statutes are very clear now. It says that board members, if there is a conflict of interest, if you cannot be an impartial decision maker, you may not participate in or vote on any quasi-judicial matter, because you will be violating that person's constitutional rights to due process. And so some of those violations include if you have a financial interest in the outcome, if you're a salesman, or if you work for a company and you stand to receive a bonus for a new use or an expansion of a use, or if you are a real estate agent and you stand to make a higher commission or even to lose money based off the outcome, that is an impermissible violation, and you should not participate in that discussion. If you have some sort of biased or a fixed opinion that just is not susceptible to change, you are not permitted to vote. If you have any sort of undisclosed ex parte communication, or if you have a close familial, business, or associational relationship. The one that can be a little tricky is that associational relationship. And we'll kind of get into some situations with our scenarios when we talk about in a second. But, we live in a large county, but it's still a fairly tight-knit community. We're not Charlotte, we're not Raleigh. So you may be hearing cases where you went to high school with the person that's the applicant, or maybe you go to church with them. And it's really kind of, what is the context of that relationship? How close is it? And whether or not you can still be an impartial decision maker in these cases. The board is also subject to the state open meetings law. All your deliberations, everything has to be out in the open. You can't retire back to the back room to deliberate. You have to do that in front of the public, and public notice is provided for these meetings. So with that, we'll get into some training scenarios. Does anybody have any questions before we proceed? Okay. So these are just going to be some basic questions. What we'll do, let's see if I can get my chat box pulled up here. If we could, maybe what we'll do is, as we go through these, and we'll ask the question, if you maybe just in the chat box, if you'll just type maybe yes or no, we'll kind of gauge just some answers, see who's paying attention, and kind of talk through a few of these real quick. But the first one we're going to talk about is a variance application is scheduled to come before the Board of Adjustment next week. And so are any of these contacts considered improper? And so the first one, the applicant is a casual acquaintance of a board member. She sees the member at a social gathering and tells her a little bit about her case. So if anybody just in the chat box, you type either yes or no. Yes, you feel like it's improper, or no, you do not feel like it's improper.
Improper.
Okay. I'm hearing a couple impropers. Does anybody think it's not proper or not improper? Okay. So yes, that is an improper conduct. One of this is you have to consider the context. There's probably actually a couple of potential conflicts here when you consider what is the nature of that casual acquaintance. Is it do their kids play baseball together? Do they just go to church, or just know each other from work, or so what is the nature of that? And is that another conflict that could disqualify you from participating? But also, if she sees you as a board member in a social gathering and wants to talk about the case, that is certainly an improper ex parte communication. And one of the things you can do as a board member is, you can just very politely say, I'm not allowed to discuss this outside of the hearing. Be glad to talk to you or get your side at the hearing, and move on from there. So you don't have to be rude about it, but you can certainly let them know that it's a potential violation for you to discuss it outside of the hearing. How about the second one? The applicant's attorney calls a board member the week before the hearing and gives him strictly factual background information about the case. You want to just put yes or no in the chat box as to whether it's appropriate or not.
I didn't think you could have a conversation with anyone.
Mr. Penner's certainly been paying attention. That's correct. That is a classic improper contact. And chances are the attorney probably knows better. And probably what he's doing is he's trying to find some basis for an appeal in case it doesn't go his way. So yes, that would certainly be an improper contact and an ex parte communication. How about C? A board member stops by the planning department the day before the hearing to get a quick briefing on the cases that are coming up from staff. And again, if type yes if you think that is an improper contact, and no if you don't think it's improper.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it's improper.
Yes, it is.
The answer is maybe. It may be improper. It may not. It really depends on the nature of the discussion that he's getting from staff. Now, if the member is, say, if he's, again, remember, we as an administrator, we have to provide the administrative materials to the board. So it could be that he's called Tab. He says, my having trouble with the mail. It hasn't come. I have my email's not working. Can I come get just a copy of my packet? That's not an improper contact. That we have to provide, again, those materials to the board members. If he's meeting with James and James says we have a special use request from David Smith and for this, that's not necessarily improper either. Now, if he is saying, if James stops him in the hallway and says, you know, this guy, we've had trouble with him. He is he's violated our ordinance on a number of occasions. We don't agree with this request. Yes, that is entirely improper, and that is ex parte communication. So again, it really just depends on the context of that conversation. Okay.
I've got a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it customary that we'll get material ahead of time? And
Yes.
how much? If there's a meeting coming up, is there a week? How's that? How does that?
Yes, typically we'll send out your packet about a week in advance. Okay. And so you should have it. Tab typically emails them out, I think now. So, you know, if you need it mailed, a hard copy mailed to you, you know, just let Tab know and we can arrange that. But typically about a week in advance is when you'll get your packets.
And certainly beforehand, that's a great question, Ms. Jackson Gilbert. If you have any questions, especially procedural type things, again, that could blanket any number of cases. And we're all about process and procedure on these cases. So anytime that we send that package out and you want to know what criteria we're supposed to use, that's kind of plain Jane. That could have really doesn't have to be case specific. That's pretty much things like we're going through tonight, just to help you make the best decision possible. So yeah, always contact us about that.
Okay.
All right, so how about a board member drives by the site in the morning of the hearing to get a firsthand view of the property? Would that be improper?
Yes, it is.
That's fine.
Yeah.
All right, so no, that's not an improper. You are allowed to make site visits to the property. The one thing is that you have to disclose that site visit at the hearing, and any information that you saw or anything anything that you gained from that visit, just make sure you disclose that at the hearing. Now, taking that one step further, say while you're out there, one of the neighbors comes over and talks about the conditions at the site. Would that be improper?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
That is an improper ex parte communication. So I'm going to skip this one and we'll go on to the variance request. So A variance request comes before the Board of Adjustment. This is going to be dealing with conflicts of interest. Is it permissible for a board member to participate in the following instances? The board member is a realtor who's listed the property for sale, and this permit would likely double the asking price of the property. Should they participate?
No, that shit. No.
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 Correct. They should not, because they have a direct financial interest. And again, it works both ways. They may be a realtor, and this request would affect one of the properties, another property they have listed for sale, and they could it could negatively affect them. So no, they have a direct financial interest. The general statutes say that you should not participate, or you may not participate in that case. How about the applicant is the board member's father-in-law?
No.
All right, no, he should
No.
not. He may hate his father-in-law's guts. So if that, he may have a bias as well as the close familial relationship. So so no, in that instance, they should not participate. How about if the applicant attends the same church as the board member?
No. No.
Yes.
Okay, so you're saying no. I hear some no's. I hear some yeses. This is probably one of those that you make. It probably depends again on the context. If you go to a large church like James's church, where you got 500 people there at church, you may not know the person. You may be aware they go to the church, but you may not have any relationship with them. And at the same time, if you go to a smaller church, you may know everybody there. You may know their grandkids, their great grandkids, their dogs' names, everything. So it really depends on the context. It could be that, association or relationship. What is the nature of that? How close is it? And whether or not that would affect your ability to be impartial. How about if the board member discloses they have a conflict of interest and will abstain from voting, but they would still like to partake in the debate and discussion prior to the vote? Should that be permissible?
No, they can't do that. No.
All right, that's a big no also. Again, the statutes are very clear now, and it says that if you cannot be an impartial decision maker, if you have a conflict of interest, you may not participate in or vote on any matter. So you would have to refrain from any discussion or any votes on that case. And truthfully, probably the most appropriate thing to do in that situation would be to get up from your seat and go sit in the audience away from the dais, away from the desk to participate. So does anybody have any questions so far about any of these? Okay. So we're going to move on then. We're going to talk about those duties and responsibilities a little bit more. Again, as we talked about, this board here, special use permits. Those are an approval procedure, again, for a category use that's permitted in certain areas if specific conditions are met. So our ordinance has standards for certain special uses. Again, some of these have separate ordinances that also have to be adhered to. So they are technically a permitted use, but they have to essentially prove to the board that they can meet those conditions and meet those requirements before they can be permitted. These types of permits may be issued with a simple majority vote. So again, you're not worried about the supermajority and trying to do the math on figuring out who's if you have to have the full board membership or what. It's just a simple majority of the board. And again, the burden of proof is on the applicant also to present that evidence to show that they will meet those specific standards. And some of the things to consider is that if the applicant, if they present evidence that they will meet the requirements and there was no evidence presented that contradicts that says that they won't meet it, technically the permit should be approved. They have met the standard for approval in that instance. On the flip side, if they don't present sufficient evidence that they will meet the requirements, say if a site plan is required that they have to meet a certain setback from a residential use, and they haven't either haven't presented that site plan or haven't gotten the evidence to show that they can meet that setback, the permit should be denied. If there is conflicting evidence, so if you have two qualified witnesses that are able to provide testimony, you can provide evidence that is conflicting. Maybe one says maybe one has a report that says tax values will be affected negatively. Maybe the other one has a report that says they won't. The board has to decide which evidence has more weight, and you have to base your facts and either issue or deny the permit based off that decision. And it's not always easy, because when you have two parties in front of you that are at odds and you have conflicting reports, you have to really kind of dig into that evidence a little bit and make that determination as to which one carries more weight. The ordinance also has specific criteria that states that the special use should be denied if the board concludes that the use will materially endanger the public health or safety, if it will substantially injure the value of adjoining or abutting property, if it won't be in harmony in the area in which it's to be located, or it won't be in general conformity with the land use plan or any other plan that's been adopted by the commissioners. One of the things about a special use permit is the board, you can impose additional conditions on that permit if it's necessary to make sure it complies with the standards, things like hours of operation, maybe additional screening. If there's a residential use, maybe they're showing screening, maybe it's not enough, and you feel like that it should be enhanced a little bit more. Maybe if you need to put an expiration date on the permit, if you don't feel like they're going to be able to establish it within a certain amount of time, or if there's other permits they need to obtain, you can either require them to obtain those permits or give them a certain amount of time to obtain them. Those conditions, however, are not enforceable unless we have written consent from the applicant. And so we'll work as staff usually to provide those conditions to them beforehand, get some type of consent from them. And then if there's conditions that get changed at the hearing, or if you add conditions or decide to remove conditions, they'll need to provide that consent again to those conditions. The permit also runs with the land, and it is transferable to another person. So if they change ownership, that person is allowed to continue with the use as it was originally permitted. However, they cannot take that permit and then take that use and then apply it to another piece of property. If they want to move, they've got to go back through the process again and get a new special use permit. So this is an example of a site plan you might see. This is actually a plan that was approved by the Board of Adjustment several years ago for a shooting range. It shows obviously the site plan has the shooting stations. It has the area that they're using for the targets and the berms. It provides also, as I mentioned, the shooting ranges have their own standalone ordinance, which requires a certain amount of separation from a dwelling, a nearby dwelling. They can't be within a quarter mile of an existing house. So this shows the quarter mile setback. And also there was a dwelling within a quarter mile, and the ordinance actually allows them to obtain a written variance or permission from that property owner to say that it's okay to be within that quarter mile distance. So that is the information that you see on the plan here. So it's not only meeting the zoning requirements, but also the shooting range requirements. And this is what would come to you for your consideration, along with any other supplemental materials, maybe proof of insurance or the application or any other kind of information that variance from the neighboring homeowner. That would all be provided in your packet for your consideration. And then once it's approved, again, we as staff, we go out, we ensure that it's been constructed to meet those standards. So this is the completed site here with the shooting station and the backstops and the berms and everything in place. For appeals, that's one of your other duties. The board may only respond to appeals of an official staff determination. And that means that usually if it's a determination we've made in writing on our county departmental letterhead, Jordan can probably chime in, but I don't believe if you make some kind of determination through an email, that's generally not considered an official determination. And then that appeal has to be made by a person who has standing. And to determine if you have standing, you have to be essentially subject to some sort of damages based off of that determination. That appeal has to be filed within 30 days. And there's some leeway in terms of how they receive that determination. If they received it by mail, we have to add 3 days to it. But we can also provide those determinations in other ways. The board would review that determination as part of the appeal process and review the evidence of the case, and would either affirm that decision, reverse it, or modify it. And then the board should also be aware of previous rulings in similar situations and should generally follow precedents, which honestly, we don't have any precedents really, because there have not been, I don't think, any appeals that have come before the Board of Adjustment. So hopefully that means we've been doing our job appropriately. So, and then variances. Variances are probably the most powerful tool you have as a Board of Adjustment. And what a variance is it gives an owner permission to do something that's contrary to the requirements of the ordinance. And it can be abused if it's not carefully administered. And there is a specific set of requirements that have to be met before variance can be granted. Like James had mentioned earlier, that if we're handing out variances left and right, that's a problem with our code. And so we need to probably address that as opposed to continuing to hand out variances, because that doesn't meet one of those standards that we're going to talk about here in a second. There are no use variances. Those are specifically prohibited by law. What a use variance is it authorizes the use of the property for a purpose that's prohibited by the ordinance. So for instance, if I have a residential piece of property and I want to put a commercial business on it, my recourse is not to apply for a variance, it's to apply for a rezone. So if they come to you with, first of all, we wouldn't let them come to you for a use variance request, but the intent is that you cannot authorize a use through variance. It has to be, that has to follow the process of being a rezone. And then, as mentioned, it does require a 4/5 majority to approve a variance. And again, those vacant positions and recusals don't count towards that calculation if there are no alternates. So as I mentioned, there are standards. There are 4 standards. And when you're considering a variance and you're considering a variance for approval, all 4 of these standards have to be met. You can't just have it meet one and not the others and still grant it. All 4 have to be met. And it's hard sometimes, as we've seen before in previous cases, it's hard, appropriately so, to meet those standards in all cases. First, the applicant has to show that strict application of the rules would create an unnecessary hardship. So that is the key. There has to be some type of hardship, and that hardship has to be peculiar to the property. It can't be a personal hardship. It has to be something associated with the property itself, whether it's the physical location of the property, the size of it, the topography, whether there's wetlands or some limitation that prevents them from meeting the requirements of the ordinance. Anything that's resulting from personal circumstances or that are common to the neighborhood. If you have a whole neighborhood and they're all subject to the same limitations on their property, that's not a hardship that is peculiar to the property for the purposes of granting a variance. One other change that 160D did make to this section is that a variance may be granted when it's necessary and appropriate to make reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities under Federal Fair Housing Act. So if somebody needs a variance to have, I'm giving away one of my scenarios here in just a second, but if they need a recommendation or a variance to add a handicap ramp to their house and it has to go into the setback, if it's reasonable, that can qualify for a variance. Now, if they're putting a big deck on it with a seating area and pergola and whatnot, and considering that their handicap ramp, that may not necessarily be reasonable, and it may not necessarily be appropriate for a variance. So again, it's context in that situation. What is a reasonable accommodation for The hardship may not be self-created, and it may not result from the property owner's own actions. As James mentioned, the case that was heard a couple of years ago, that was a self-created hardship, and the board found it to be so because the property owner had measured from the wrong point in the road to determine where his setback was. So it was our recommendation from staff, and it was the board's finding that was self-created. And then also simply purchasing property, knowing that a variance may be needed or that there are circumstances that may justify a variance, that is not considered self-created. So just the act of purchasing property does not disqualify you from that.
What is your definition of setback?
The setback is the area that's set back from the property line where you have the minimum distance from the property line where you can build a structure. So for instance, if you're off a state maintained road or highway, that setback is measured from the right-of-way line, and it's 40 feet from the right-of-way line back. And that's how far back you have to be before you can build your house or a structure.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. And then finally, the applicant has to show that the variance will be consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance, such that public safety, secure, and substantial justice is achieved. And what they mean by substantial justice, essentially, it's not going to harm anybody else. It's not going to harm any other property, but it still meets the spirit and intent of the ordinance. You're not trying to just get away with something just to get away with it. So we'll get into our final training scenarios here. We'll run through these fairly quickly if we can. I'm going to skip the voting scenario if that's okay with everybody, and we'll go right to the variance request. So we're going to talk about the factors. Do any of these factors meet the standards for granting a variance? A, in order to construct a residence and avoid wetlands on the site and still meet the setback requirements, it will cost somebody an extra $3,000 in construction costs. A setback variance is requested that would reduce those costs to $1,000. So does that, in your opinion, meet the standard for granting the variance?
No, I'll say no.
No.
I hear a lot of no's. That's correct. The cost is a personal circumstance. And essentially what they've said is that absent cost, they could still meet the requirements of the ordinance. And so there is nothing that, there are wetlands on the site, but it's not something that is peculiar enough or a hardship enough based off the physical property itself that would create that hardship. So the hardship is purely just one that's considered self-created or is a personal circumstance. They're trying to save themselves some money. So that would not be a standard. This is what we talked about. Is the applicant is physically incapacitated and asks for relief from the setback requirement for a handicap. We just talked about that one. Yes, it may be granted for reasonable accommodation under Federal Fair Housing Act. How about the ordinance does not allow off-premise advertising? The applicant has a commercial building site that is not visible from the road. They ask for a variance to put a sign up on the adjoining lot, which is visible from the road.
No.
That's also that is a use variance. So the ordinance specifically does not allow off-premise advertising, maybe in just that district, maybe countywide, but for whatever reason, the ordinance does not allow that use, and they are requesting a variance to allow it, which would be a use variance. So that is absolutely prohibited. And our final one, this is a training scenario, last training scenario. We're going to go through a few of these. Again, the scenarios for a solar farm, you don't hear solar farms, but the intent is really to go through it in terms of the evidentiary requirements and what kind of evidence the board would consider in making a decision. So Solar Resources has submitted an application for a special use permit to construct a large solar farm on 45 acres of land within the county. There are several residential uses surrounding the property, including a large subdivision. Should the board consider the following evidence and/or testimony in making its decision? So a neighboring property owner has stated that she has small children in her home and is concerned about the health effects of living near a solar farm. She provided a copy of an article that she downloaded from the internet that states electromagnetic radiation generated by solar farms could cause cancer. Should the board consider that in making as evidence in making your decision?
No. No.
Okay. So I'm hearing some no's. Why? Does anybody want to explain why they think no? Mr.
Because it may not be factual. She don't have anything to back it up. It may be someone's opinion.
Okay. Does anybody think we should consider that for their decision? All right, well, good. That's a no. As Mr. Fleming said, she is not an expert. You don't know the source of the information, where she's getting it from. You know, hopefully we all know you can't believe everything you read on the internet these days. So we don't know who wrote the article, what their intent was, if they actually based on any sort of study. But otherwise, even if it had been based on some sort of study, she's not qualified to present that as evidence. She's just a neighboring property owner, and she hasn't conducted the study on her own or been able to provide that information. So second one, on behalf of the developer, a certified real property appraiser provided an analysis of property values for homes that are adjacent to 4 other solar farms in the state. The report shows that the solar farms had no impact on surrounding property values and predicted similar results for the proposed project. So can you consider that for your decision?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I heard some yeses. Ms. Jackson Gilbert saying no.
Just because it said on behalf of the developer,
Okay.
it looks like it might be self-serving.
Okay. All right. Why would the board? Mr. Bridgers, you said yes. Why would you consider that for the decision? Or Mr. Pierce, you put yes. Why would you consider it for decision?
Because he's a certified property appraiser, I would tend to look at it as see if he's an expert at that, and he can assess whether it's going to impact the adjacent homes. And so I would consider that expert testimony.
Okay. So the answer is yes. You could consider it. He is, as Mr. Pierce said, he is certified. He's provided an analysis that he's probably prepared according to certain professional standards and requirements. And even though it is on behalf of the developer, they have the right to present the evidence to make their case, and that is what they are presenting. So yes, this could be considered for your decision. It is relevant. It's material. He has the report itself, and he is qualified. So yes. The next one, the president of the homeowners association for the adjacent subdivision provided a petition that's been signed by 116 residents in opposition to the request. The petition states that solar panels and the fencing around solar farms are unsightly and would substantially devalue their properties. Could we consider, or could the board consider this petition as part of your decision?
No.
Okay, got a no. Okay, got a yes. Okay. So who said yes? Why would you consider that for your decision? Mr. Pierce?
Yeah, I said yes because they are the homeowners association. It's they have an interest based on their impact in their property. And so I think that they, it's definitely impacting them.
Okay. And who said no? Did somebody say no? They wouldn't
Said
consider
no.
it? Okay, Mr. Fleming, why would you say no?
Again, because there's no factual evidence. That's just their opinion. There's no facts about it, especially when they said about the fencing being devaluing their property. They don't have no factual evidence supporting that from experts.
That's correct. Again, remember the point of the quasi judicial hearing is to establish facts. It's not to gather opinions. And a petition of this nature is essentially is opinion. You don't know what the signers were told about the request. You don't know what they know about the request. They're not under oath. They're not available to be questioned about what they signed. And they are, it's considered an opinion. You don't even know if they're actually neighbors. You don't know if they are who they say they are, or if they live where they say they live. So with 116 residents, again, some of them are probably not directly adjacent to it. They may live some distance from it, and their property may not necessarily be impacted at all by this. So what you can do in that type of situation is that you can accept the petition, you can enter it into evidence, but you cannot base your decision solely on that petition. So there has to be some other factual evidence that you base your decision on. But you can certainly accept it and include it in the record that you accept it. So how about this situation? Another certified real property appraiser has testified in opposition to the project. So he's testifying on the other folks' behalf, or the other party's behalf. He stated that he had not prepared a detailed analysis, but he's disputed the results of the previous report. He said it was his professional opinion that it's too early to tell how new solar technology would impact home values. He stated that the highest and best use of the property is residential home site because they will be more harmonious with the surrounding residential properties. So what do we think about that? Is that something that you can consider in your decision?
That's a maybe.
Maybe.
He says he hadn't prepared a detailed analysis.
Okay. With that, he hadn't prepared. He hadn't done all his homework. It would be a no.
Does anybody say yes? Yes. Okay. In this instance, you're correct. No. He is qualified. He is a residential or a certified property appraiser. But like was mentioned, he has not done the analysis. He's not prepared those comparables. He hasn't looked at the home values. He's basing it off his professional opinion. And even though he's qualified, he can't use just his credentials to rebut that report that's already been submitted. You have to, again, this is where that conflicting testimony comes into play. Which one holds more weight? You have two certified property appraisers. One has submitted a material report. He's analyzed the properties, analyzed other properties throughout the state and found no impact. And you have another one who is essentially providing his professional opinion. And you have to weigh which one has more weight, or you have to determine which one has more weight. And in that instance, the one that has the report and that has done the analysis, that has more weight. Again, also he's saying that the highest and best use of the property is residential home site. He doesn't know that. That's just his opinion. There could be other factors. There may be a reason that the solar farm is the highest and best use. They may not be able to get septic tanks, or may have some kind of other limitations to that property that would prevent them from doing residential. a residential development, but he wouldn't necessarily know that without doing that background legwork. So. Last one, neighboring property owner who's professor of mechanical engineering testified that there are problems with solar energy, including high costs in California and Europe. He stated that North Carolina taxes solar farms at only 20% of their value, that the county would see very little economic impact from the project. How about his testimony? Would we consider that in making our decision? Anybody want to weigh in?
That sounds like his opinion again.
Okay. Anybody think we should consider it?
No, I don't.
Right, we should. Again, this testimony is outside his area of expertise. So he's in mechanical engineering. He doesn't have a background apparently in taxation policy or economics. So he's really kind of speaking out of turn and talking about things that he really has no expertise to present or has any sort of qualifications to present to the board. So one thing I should note, all of these scenarios have come from actual court cases. And in many of these cases, the Superior Court overturned the decision of the board based off the fact that they did not follow the evidentiary requirements. So you see right there, Grimesley, that's one of the cases. There was a solar farm that was hurt in Grimesley. There were the first scenario with the article from the internet about causing cancer. The board used that as one of their decisions or bases for their decision. And the Superior Court said that was not appropriate, that there was no other evidence presented to overturn the applicant's or to rebut the applicant's evidence, and that they turned around and made them, the Superior Court said, you have to issue this permit, and that will happen. So all these situations, again, came from Robeson County, Currituck County, Lee County, so it can happen, and that's one of the reasons we go through this training to make sure that you're aware of the types of evidence that you hear in trying to make those determinations. So with that, that's the end of our training session. So I'll be glad to answer any questions anybody might have. But I thank you for your time, and thank you for your service to this board and to the county. And we look forward to working with you over the next couple of years.
It was very clear. Got a good picture now.
Thank you.
Well, we appreciate your time and effort. We will also send out this training. And Eric, just keep your screen up there because it's only another slide or two, and I'll let you kind of click through that. But we'll send this information out. And again, our county legal staff also help through these processes. And Ms. Rita Jackson Gilbert, every case is different. Just like Eric's presented tonight, this takes some thought, this takes some effort. If it was clear cut, it would probably be a staff function. But we need a full board to help with this process. That's the way the state statutes are set up. So you serve a very vital role. And with that, I'm going to roll right in, Eric, if you don't mind taking us to the next slide. Just to give you an idea on pages 58 and 59, there are a lot of other things that our office has been tasked with. And several of those involve practices or procedures that in some way impact what you do. So two of our main projects that we've got in our work program for this current fiscal year or this current calendar year moving into next fiscal year, number one is completing the NC 43 South Land Use Plan. The second one, which we've already talked about, is updating our comprehensive land use plan. Both of those play vital roles in our land use regulatory system and also typically are going to impact some of the information you'll need to refer to in your decisions at some point in time. We're also in the process of updating our comprehensive transportation plan, which is one of those plans that ultimately would be adopted by our Board of Commissioners, and that's another type of plan that may need to be referred to in some of your decisions. We are heavily involved with Census 2020. You may have heard just yesterday that North Carolina now has an extra seat, a new seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. That's a big deal for our state. And certainly our local census data has not been released yet, but once it is, that means we'll be redistricting here locally. Our county has not grown uniformly north of the river versus south of the river. So that means some of our voting districts here within our county will need to be changed. And typically our office handles those redistricting maps and ensures that our board approves and adopts that. And ultimately it goes on to the Board of Elections. So there are a number of other items. We deal with community development items such as housing rehabilitation. We also help with flood recovery efforts. We understand that our Hurricane Florence buyout program, again, Hurricane Florence is almost two and a half years ago. We're just now getting word back from FEMA that some of those properties will be funded for buyout, and we'll be administering that program too. So a number of items on this work program, some that you may not hear about each time we get together, but if you do have folks in your neighborhood, concerned people about some of these projects that we work on, please have them to go to our website. You can see that at the bottom of the screen. There is a tremendous amount of information available, and all the development ordinances that Eric has spoken to, all those are accessible right through our website as well. So that's pretty much all we have tonight, Mr. Chairman. A lot of information thrown out there. Just as a reminder, May 25th, keep it marked on your calendar. We'll let you know as soon as possible if we have any cases for your consideration at that time. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you. If you have any questions or would like any further discussion about any of the items we've been over tonight.
Are there any questions? Anything else that needs to be discussed tonight? If not, I entertain the motion for adjournment.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Look to see y'all May 25th if need be. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you
tonight.
again, everyone. Appreciate everybody coming online tonight. Have a good evening.
Okay.